Chapter 9, Killdeer Farm on the Outskirts of Chokecherry. Casey whipped out the kickstand with the heel of his boot and turned General P's engine off. He parked in the early morning shadows of Hondo's central barn. The sliding doors were already open. A nearby rooster with a bright red mohawk crooned his best morning melody. The smell of fresh hay lingered, and Casey saw 3 bundles stacked against the barn. He thought he heard a faint pounding noise from one of the other buildings, but couldn't place the sound. Some horses shifted in their stalls as he passed on his way to the back of the barn. Rustic copper light fixtures hung from the ceiling, with bulbs that blasted yellow beams of light down the center of the barn. He saw a note taped to the door of the last stall. Next to the note was a small metal shelf with a glass bottle on it, about the size of a half-gallon container of milk. There was a large rubber nipple fitted over the top of the bottle, which reminded him of feeding bison babies at his rescue. A rustling sound came from the stall. Casey peered over the wall and saw the buffalo calf. He was munching on hay, looking up at him with those big black eyes. His tiny tail wagged back and forth like an excited puppy. "Hey buddy, glad to see you back on your feet. How's your leg?" The calf kicked up hay with his back hooves, but favored his good leg. Casey saw dried blood on the bandage on its leg, but it seemed like the blood flow had stopped. He read the note. "Morning, Casey. I prepared a milk solution for the calf. I'll have another bottle ready for you after work. If you need me this morning, I'll be exercising out at the gray shed behind the barn. Hondo. P.S. Think of a good name for the calf." "A good name, huh?" Casey grabbed the bottle and opened the stall. "What should we call you?" The calf limped to the back of the stall. Casey found a wooden stool in the opposite corner and moved it to the center. "It's okay, boy. Just want to give you some nutrients." He extended the nipple toward the calf. The calf gazed at him, not moving. When he ran Red Dog, he remembered having long debates with other rangers on whether they should name the bison babies. They named a few the first year, but it was too emotionally difficult for the rangers when the calves returned to the wild. They assigned tracking tag numbers to the calves and settled on referring to them by those numbers to make it easier on the humans. "But for you, little buddy, I'll make an exception." The calf stepped back so his rear end was tight against the corner. Casey remembered easing animal tension by singing to them. "Want me to sing you something?" He tried to think of a song and remembered Chucky's rendition of Johnny Cash's song last night. He shook his head. "Not gonna sing about God cutting any of us down." He thought of Flip Kenny's Memorial Day song. The song's melody had cemented in Casey's head, but he couldn't remember the words. He hummed the melody and parts of the last verse surfaced. "It might be the last Monday of May, but something about patriots paving the way. We head down to the cemetery to pray, for this is the soldier's day." An inch at a time, the calf hobbled toward the bottle. Its eyes darted between Casey's mouth and the bottle's nipple. Casey continued to sing the melody and started making up words. "My neighbor would kill me right about now if he heard me humming this melody out loud. He thinks Flipper is a total loon, but everyone knows he can carry a tune." The calf sniffed the nipple, slow to bring its mouth up. It bit into the nipple and milk entered its mouth. Its eyes expanded and it sucked with more strength. Casey had to hold the bottle with both hands. "I bet you're thirsty. What would be a good name for you?" Most of Casey's North Dakota references had to do with Teddy Roosevelt. He tried to think of names Teddy used for his beloved horses. He remembered Teddy had a horse called Little Texas he used in the Battle of San Juan, but he couldn't think of the horses he favored in North Dakota. It was on the fringe of his brain. "Maybe you can help me, little guy. What was the name of Teddy's horse in North Dakota? It starts with an M, right?" The calf responded with a blank stare as he finished the last of the bottle. Casey tried to pull the bottle away, but the calf gripped it with its teeth. "It's empty, buddy. Need to get you some more for later." The calf wouldn't let go. "Fine, just keep it in here. I'm sure Hondo has more bottles." Casey reached out and rubbed his head, but the calf shirked away. "I know we're still feeling each other out. Just rest up today and I'll see you later." He closed the stall's door and left the barn for his bike. About to start it up, he stopped when he heard the pounding noise again. Checked his watch and figured he still had about 15 minutes before he had to head to work. Maybe more since he was so close. Snapping off a piece of long grass next to the barn, he chewed on it as he walked toward the noise. He watched the striped farm cat chase after a mouse who evaded capture by skirting into a tiny hole in the barn's corner. A misty fog rose from the ground as the sun baked the night's frost away. A robin bounced around in search of worms. A cow mooed in the distance. The entire farm seemed to be doing their morning calisthenics. There was a gray shed behind the barn. It had a single wooden door and windows that were propped open despite the early morning chill. Casey saw shadows dance inside the shed and recognized a hefty punching bag hanging from the inside of the shed. He stopped just outside the window to watch. Hondo was in an all-gray sweatsuit positioned in front of the bag. His hands and feet were in a fighting stance Casey had never seen before. His body arched forward with his weight on his front leg, one hand in front of his face and the other down. He threw jabs, hooks, and an occasional kick with lightning speed and accuracy. "If I was that big, I would have surrendered 3 punches ago," Casey said. Hondo kept throwing punches. "Come in, Casey Clay." The shed's interior walls were lined with movie posters of Bruce Lee. One poster showed Lee in his famous yellow jumpsuit, another with him in a fighting pose with blood marks stretched across his cheek and chest. A sign on the far end of the shed read, "Dojo of Jeet Kune Do." There was a floor-to-ceiling mirror that covered the length of the wall under the sign. The room smelled of dried sweat. On the near side was a bookshelf littered with books, and the adjacent wall held various weapons like nunchucks, staffs, and swords. Long wooden benches ran along the walls on both sides of the room. "Quite the setup you have here." Hondo drove one last punch into the bag. "Your turn." Casey crossed his arms. "Oh no, I just wanted to stop by and tell you I fed the calf, but he wouldn't give the bottle back. I have to get to work soon." Hondo stopped the bag's momentum. "Come on, tough guy, show me what you've got." "You just want me to hit it a few times?" Casey had grown up taking martial arts classes like Taekwondo, but gravitated toward boxing in college when he learned Philly's boxing roots ran much deeper than the Rocky and Creed movies. He belonged to a boxing club at Temple, but never competed in any collegiate events. "Yes, strike the bag however you can." Hondo slid to the side of the room. "Fine." Casey shucked his coat and came at the bag with a swooping hook that shook the rafters. "You have power. Good. So does every other slow buffoon with a muscle shirt out here. Show me technique." Casey threw some quick combinations. Jab, cross, left hook. Jab, cross, left uppercut to the midsection of the bag. Cross, left hook, cross. "Try a kick." Casey backed away from the bag and delivered a roundhouse kick into the bag that made it bend. "Okay, that's enough." "What do you mean?" Casey felt his body temperature rise. "Your strength is impressive, but your footwork and techniques are weak. You're too slow and you leave yourself exposed." "Says you." Casey snatched his jacket off the floor on his way to the door. "Wait." Hondo's voice was stern. Casey grabbed the handle of the door and stopped. "What?" "I have a confession to make." Hondo motioned toward the bench. "Please, have a seat." Casey glanced at his watch. He still had 10 minutes to spare. He looked at Hondo's outstretched hands and shuffled to the bench. Hondo slung a white towel over his neck and sat on the bench opposite from him. "What's your confession?" "I've been watching you from a distance over the past few weeks. I always like to know who is on the grounds around my property, and I noticed you when you arrived at the park. Not just because of your height and size, but I noticed the way you observe things around you. Most kids your age just blow by nature in this world we live in like it's just an annoying distraction from their screens. You appear to be more aware of your surroundings, less consumed by devices. I pride myself on that, but if you've been watching me, how come I didn't see you until the incident with the calf?" Hondo grinned. "Like I said, I'm a retired BIA agent. I've spent more time on surveillance in my life than you've been alive." "Makes sense. I guess growing up in national parks with little to no reception made me focus more on nature. Even when I left my family for college in Philly, I was never on my phone for safety reasons. Whether on campus or on the streets, you had to keep your head on a swivel. Not just for shootings or whatever, but so you didn't get hit crossing the road or twist an ankle in a pothole." "Smart." Hondo paused for a moment. "My experience in law enforcement has also given me the ability to read people's body language. As I observed you from afar and now up close, I noticed there's something conflicting about you. Your shoulders slump more than they should. Why?" Casey sat up straight on the bench. "Well, I'm not sure." He sighed. "Could be I felt down about my position here in North Dakota. I sort of thought my first temp assignment would be at a bigger park where I could use the skills I learned in school, trying to set myself up for a permanent ranger position in the law enforcement track. Speaking of being an agent, did you attend FLETC?" Hondo grinned. "I'm flattered you think I'm young enough to have attended FLETC. No. FLETC didn't kick off until the mid-70s. I became the youngest ever police officer on the 3 affiliated tribes in 1963. I grew up close to here on Fort Berthold Indian Reservation." "How come you don't live there now?" Hondo let out a long sigh. "After 5 years on the job, I was the ripe age of 25. Everyone told me I would be the chief of police and perhaps serve in other leadership roles within the tribe. I don't know what it was, call it a yearning in my soul, or just call it the 60s, but I left. Abandoned my home and local badge to head out to San Francisco in the summer of 68. To put flowers in your hair and smoke weed?" Hondo laughed. "That might have been a small part of it, but I really went out there to train at the Little Dragon's dojo in San Fran." Hondo motioned toward the poster of Bruce Lee. "Is that what the Jeet Kune Do sign is all about?" Yes, I learned the way of the intercepting fist from the master himself. It changed how I thought about fighting in self-defense. After a year of training, I had an itch to get back into law enforcement. I met someone at the dojo who worked for this company out of Utah called Theocol. They just won a contract with the Department of the Interior to run training courses for BIA in New Mexico. He recruited me to join the training team, and I helped set up the first ever formalized program for BIA agents in '69, which I assume led you to become an agent yourself? Hondo nodded. They moved the training to Utah in '73 and I was homesick, so I applied to BIA and was accepted without delay. I thought they would assign me to my home reservation, but Standing Rock became my duty station. Casey had heard about Standing Rock in the news from their opposition to the oil pipeline that ran through North and South Dakota. That's not too far from here. Not in terms of miles, but it might as well be a world away from my home tribe. I thought I would come back to the state as a hero, but my old tribe shunned me for leaving, and the citizens of Standing Rock were skeptical of all law enforcement, especially federal agents. Tried to make the best of it, but I never felt like I belonged. Had other little stints throughout the country and spent some time in Washington, but I always felt like an outsider. Despite not having a community, I retired here so I could feel close to home. I can relate to feeling like an outsider, Casey said. Looking back, what would you have done differently? It was wonderful meeting Bruce Lee, setting up BIA's formal training, and getting the federal badge. But with time and reflection, all those experiences lost their luster after a few years. I worked 30 years as a BIA agent, but never felt like I had the impact I wanted to have. I wish I would have stayed in the one community where I felt I belonged, the one I turned my back on. There were a lot of problems on my reservation, and I know if I would have stayed, I could have helped fix some of them. It's too late for that now. I guess my advice to my 20-something-year-old self would be that. Find your community, whatever community that is, and find the one thing that you can do better than anyone else to make that community a better place. Casey thought of his own community. He was transient. He never felt like he had time to plant roots anywhere. The longest he'd lived anywhere was in Wyoming and Philly, both for 4 years. Except college itself is a transitory experience, and he spent most of his time on campus and not in the greater community. Did you look at that company name? Hondo asked. I started to, but hit some dead ends. I want to show you something. Hondo grabbed an iPad resting on the bench and handed it to Casey. What's this? There was a video loaded on the screen. Push play. The video was grainy, shot from a stationary camera with a wide-angle lens focusing on the riverbed along Knife River. Casey glanced up at Hondo. Did you get footage of the killer? Keep watching, you'll see in a few seconds. This is from the security camera on the edge of my dock canopy that points downriver in the park's direction. Casey stared at the video. His heart raced when he saw someone riding a blue ATV enter the frame. The person was wearing tan camo attire like a hunter might wear. Something sparkled silver in the video, and then the ATV stopped at the edge of the riverbank, right on the property line of the park. Out of the tall reeds, 2 brown figures emerged, the buffalo cow and the calf. The man pulled something from his side and there were flashes from the end of a gun muzzle. Casey squeezed the iPad so hard he thought he would break it. The mother ran in front of the calf. The bullet struck her down. The calf hid behind the mother as bullets whizzed over its head. Casey held his breath. The man lifted something to his ear and fired one more shot toward the calf and drove off. After several moments, the calf peeked out from behind the mother's body and jumped into the river. It struggled against the river's current but made it to the far side where it moved out of the frame. I'm gonna kill that bastard, Casey whispered. Remember this feeling you have right now when you find him. Don't let that feeling of revenge blind you, but channel it into an aggression that benefits you. He shot them for no reason. Casey handed the tablet back to Hondo. Is there any way to make the image of the shooter bigger? I tried earlier, but it's too distorted. Hondo slid the video back halfway and stopped it. He enlarged the frame and held it up to Casey. The hat he's wearing reminds me of a fisherman bucket hats, like the kind worn by folks in the military. But do you see that flash of silver from the hat? There was a silver starburst coming from the shooter's hat on the video where Hondo paused it. I see it, but what do you think that is? I used to wear a similar hat when I did a lot of fishing. One thing fishermen like to do is wear hooks like trolling spoons in their hats as good luck charms. Sure, I used to do the same thing growing up when we went fishing. We don't know the shooter's identity, but we know he's wearing a hat with what looks like a fish hook. So you could consider, I'm going over there to the far side of the river to check it out, see if I can get a closer look at him. Hondo grinned. My thoughts exactly, but these guys have guns, so do it from your park grounds and don't drift into their land. If you come across anyone, use the fig leaf of asking about the injured buffalo, but keep this in the back of your mind. The owner of that property is a guy named Parson. I knew his father until he passed away, but don't know the son as much. His father always complained about Parson being unemployed unemployed, so I assumed if he found oil on his property, he would be around. Plus, Parson had a habit of riding that same blue ATV down by Knife River at least once a day, and he hasn't had it out for almost a week. I'm guessing the shooter in the video isn't Parson. No, it's not. Casey checked his watch and stood up. I have to get going. Hold up 1 second. Hondo sprang to his feet. I have 2 things to give you. One now and the other when you're ready. He grabbed a weathered black book off the bookshelf and handed it to Casey. It had Chinese lettering on the cover with the English title, Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Different colored post-it notes protruded from the top. In your downtime at work or at your apartment. I live in an RV over at the Birch Bark campsite. Whenever you find the time, I want you to humor an old man. Read this book and study the poses. If we have time later today after the calf's second feeding, we can go through some techniques. If not, then tomorrow. Thanks for this. Casey tucked the book in his arm. What's the other thing? When you're ready, Casey Clay. Hondo ushered him outside, and not a moment before. Ready for what? He wondered.